There are screening programs, and we see that the WHO is pushing a lot on that. But then you have a screening program and you have vaccination. But people have to realize that from all the, let's say, eligible women in the world, so we're talking between a certain age, to a certain age, those women, there is 15%, 15% participating in a screening program. So there is 85% of women currently not screened.
Wow, I mean, let's stay with that stat for a minute. Only about 15% of women actually take part in preventative care for cervical cancer.
Discomfort, unpleasant, invasive, painful.
I'm a medical doctor. You really have the possibility to make a big impact here because you can prevent disease, and I think that's really fascinating. If you are early enough, you can basically remove the cells who have a tendency to get cancerous, and then you eradicated cancer totally. And that's amazing. Combined with vaccination, I can really dream of the moment that we beat cervical cancer.
Welcome to FemHealth Founders, the show spotlighting founders, funders, and innovators in women's health. I am your host, Marianne, impact investor and founder of FemHealth Ventures Alliance. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to FemHealth Ventures. I'm your host, Marianne, and today's episode dives into a blind spot in women's health diagnostics that could impact millions of lives. I'm joined by not one, but two powerhouse guests, Nutte van Belzen, CMO of CC Diagnostics, and Ronald, the CEO. Their mission? To catch cervical cancer before it becomes a threat, with a technology that could change how we think about early detection. But it always hasn't been a straight path, from missed opportunities in the healthcare system to moments where it all nearly fell apart. This episode has it all. So stay with us, because at the end, Nutte and Ron will share the one insight that changed how they lead the company. So I think I'm going to start with you, Nutte. What pulled you into the world of women's health diagnostics? Was there a moment that made this feel urgent or personal for you?
So our story starts around 5 years ago, where I was already working on a project around cervical cancer. But then in that moment, it also became really personal because my wife, Yvette, by that time, she went to the doctor for a test, a cervical cancer test, and that test turned out to be positive, which is not positive news. It meant that she was suspected of having cervical cancer, and that was a terrible moment, really frightening. She had to go to the gynaecologist for biopsies, invasive procedures, and after weeks of waiting, they called her telling, "Oh, you don't have cancer, but your screening test was incorrect." And that really struck me, where I realized the project I was working on cervical cancer, it can happen to anyone. And the diagnostics surrounding cervical cancer, it's not at the level we want to have. It must be improved. So that then the whole company became really personal to me and gave me a lot of drive to push this forward.
Wow. Ron, let me turn to you as the CEO of this company, CC Diagnostics. What was your aha moment that sort of made you think, you know what, we need to run with this?
Well, I come from bigger industry, and bigger industry, when you are at the lower echelon level, even up to, let's say, vice president or whatever, you're never really concerned about money. And then you suddenly hear a story like this, and then a startup that would be super interested to work with you, and you just count your balances and you think, what can I bring to such an organization? And what I see now that in founders, there needs to be something personal. And then you look around in your own life. Now, my wife didn't have the scare of cervical cancer, but my wife has endometriosis, and she is 63 now. But at that time, it was totally kind of unaware, and people didn't know about it. But we spoke a lot about this. And since her 16th birthday, she had to go to the gynecologist for all kinds of nasty investigations, and every year multiple times. So she doesn't participate in screening. So for her to get cervical cancer could be a reality, but she doesn't want to go to the gynecologist because it's so painful, it's so invasive. She's done with it. Now, then I hear about this solution that we're bringing to market, where all these kind of pre-visits just for sampling is not needed. And I think, large industry is nice, but there are better things to do with your business life, let's say. And that made me make the switch. So, yeah.
So, Ron, you've talked about, and Nutte, thank you so much for sharing that. I can imagine what a roller coaster that must be to get a diagnosis that is positive for cervical cancer, and then you get, a different diagnosis. I can't imagine what she must have gone through during that time, and both of you as a family, what that would have meant for you. So maybe, Ron, I come to you with this. Tell me, what is fundamentally broken about how we currently detect cervical cancer? I'll come to the science first.
I want to say it's not broken. It is good that there are programs. There are screening programs, and we see that the WHO is pushing a lot on that. But then you have a screening program and you have vaccination. But people have to realize that from all the, let's say, eligible women in the world, so we're talking between a certain age, to a certain age, those women, there is 15%, 15%, participating in a screening program. So there is 85% of women currently not screened. Then there are all kinds of reasons why not. These reasons could be there is no screening program. Sub-Saharan countries, there is no screening program, but yet it will be implemented. But then it comes to the fact of, why does my wife not participate? And there are more in our organization. Even the mother of one of our members is not participating, also for these kind of reasons. Discomfort, unpleasant, invasive, painful. And they said, well, I'll see. Whenever I get complaints, I might take action. That should change. And there has been too long no real focus on that aspect of why women don't participate. They just accept that women will go there, and you're a woman, you know how invasive this is, and they just accept that. But let's put it in perspective. Let's ask the men to do this. Let's do it. Let's ask men every year to do a cystoscopy. Let's go there and see how many would participate on something that you don't feel it's even happening in your body. You have no complaints, so why would you go? And finally, there is attention, a lot of attention, but there is so much to be done. Can continue for this for hours, but okay.
Well, I mean, let's stay with that stats for a minute. Only about 15% of women actually take part in preventative care for cervical cancer for whatever reasons, access, the invasive nature of the current preventative care diagnostics that we have. That is incredible. Nutte, can you tell us about your technology?
Yeah, so our technology is a diagnostic solution, and it can be performed in the laboratory. And we make use of PCR, which is globally available, especially since the COVID pandemic. And PCR is really simple to perform, but we take another approach to PCR. So we don't look for a virus, like for example during the COVID pandemic, but we look for dynamic changes in the DNA. And we call that methylation. And it's basically a chemical reaction of the DNA where there is a chemical group is connected to the DNA, and then it becomes useless. We call it in biological terms, it's called silenced, which is maybe a nice description of what it is. It's there, but it can't perform its action. We call it like a policeman who was handcuffed, right? It's strong in nature, but it cannot execute its function. And we can measure those methylation changes. And based on the methylation profile, we can accurately predict and detect cervical cancer, even before it's there. And that's how we position our technology.
So in terms of invasiveness, how invasive is the test?
Good question. Typically in cervical cancer, a pap smear is taken, and then that's used to examine the smear under the microscope. But in our case, we can use self-collected material. So then a woman can take her own swab at home and without any stressors. She can send it via the mail to the laboratory, and there it can be processed in high volumes, in high scale and efficiency.
Wow, that's incredible. I was actually reading last week about the self-test or self-diagnostics market. Yeah. And how that is expected to grow. The growth we've seen in the last couple of years, but also the expected growth over the next couple of years to 2030. That's really a growth market. And
it is. Yeah.
It's interesting because I have actually done the first self-diagnostics myself. I was running some tests or hormone testing, and I received the kit, and it was so easy. And as you say, it took out all the stressors. I could do it in my own the comfort of my own home. That was amazing.
Yeah, especially since COVID, we know that self-sampling, self-testing, it became way more accepted in society globally. So that's a really big improvement. And we see also in all the countries, self-collectors are implemented. They take a while to get drove, but then there's certainly, it's like a typical hockey stick. Yes. Really nice image. They get a lot of acceptance, and they bring in a lot of more women who currently don't participate in the screening. Yes. So they have been proven to not participate, and now they participate because it becomes more women friendly. Yes. And also those who have been always going to the GP for a sample collection, now they also prefer the self-collector, which means the quality and the experience of the screening programs goes up because it's clear what women prefer.
And you've just achieved some milestones recently. Do you want to share that with us?
Yeah, we last year we finalized our clinical validation study, and we just presented that on a really big international scientific congress. It's around 3,500 samples, which we analyzed, and then we clearly showed our superior performance in that study. We detected all the cancer cases, while the comparative test, so the microscope test, cytology, only detected 77%, which means that all the women who were missed, they got a later diagnosis and probably a poorer outcome, which could all have been prevented if we use our technology. So that's what we're aiming for. Now we got our clinical validation data. We're going towards certification and commercialization.
That's awesome. This is, as an investor, this is ticking all my boxes. So I like to lead with the science, So clinically validated, improving outcomes, improving efficiency, also improving participation rates, also with the self-testing. I'm going to take it one step further. What about access? I am African, and we know that, one of the things when it comes to health equity is also access to people in, say, in the global south.
Maybe you can highlight a bit on that, Ronald. Will we also expect our pricing to go?
Yeah, I can. The issue of access is clearly one that is also discovered by the WHO. So there is a lot of programs actually taking place right now, but we have a lot of contacts already in places like Ghana, Ethiopia, and what we hear there is that women might be tested for HPV, so the virus that could cause cancer, but then there is a follow-up needed. And what is the issue with the follow-up is that there are not enough cytopathologists, so the people that examine cells under a microscope in African countries. They're simply not. And we are in the Western world are also facing the same problems. There are less and less of these skilled people. This means that you lose these women in the follow-up. So you have this high percentage of positive HPV positive women, but they disappear. They don't come up. So what they do there is that they, for instance, go with little mobile vans to all these villages where women then need to be examined live, and there it's the invasiveness again. So what if that first sample could have been used also to not only filter out HPV positivity, but then the minute you're positive, check for cancer or pre-cancer before you're gonna investigate all these women in an invasive manner. That is what we're bringing. And then we come to price point, which is typical, of course, for the region, but everywhere. I mean, there's pressure on price always, especially in screening. We make a PCR test, and PCR is basically reagents, fluids together in some tubes in a little box. So in essence, it does not need to be dramatically expensive, and scaling up can help as well. What we have decided already, and I'm happy I brought this in and Nutte agrees with me fully, is that we will have a pricing model where indeed for African countries there will be different prices than for, so we simply compare them low, middle income countries and high income countries. Because that's the reality of the fact. We are in here to make the business successful, but really to make the world a better place and detect cervical cancer before it's there. And then only focusing on massive revenue is not the right thing to do. So we really hope we can bring solutions to also the African continent, because they have been underserved for many, many years.
Yes.
Yeah, true.
Thank you for that. So we will come to the investor advice because I want to talk about that with you. But first, I want to talk about the hard stuff. So every startup that I've spoken to sort of has that moment when they think, are we going to make it? What was that moment for you?
Good question. For us, it was a challenging moment where we had a certain design of our product, and we use certain raw materials for that. And we thought we had a really good connection with one of the raw material suppliers in that sense. So we went on development, etc. And at a certain point, it became clear that manufacturer, that supplier didn't want to provide the materials under certain standards and didn't want to make an agreement on that. So that pushed us back, I would say, a certain amount of months in development, where we also, it became critical, like we need to have this item for our test. And will there be other suppliers who will be able to deliver the same quality and under agreements? So that was really a challenging moment for us. But then it's good to have good partners in that sense who have technical knowledge, the network of Ronald. So we got a lot of access to several suppliers who send us samples to test. And that's, I think we, as a team, we pulled it together. I think it's also the moment where we realized we should invest a lot in our company structure. So medical companies typically work according to the ISO 13485 framework. It's a sort of instruction of how to do business. And of course, that framework also says like you should have all these agreements in place before you go to the next step. But in startups, sometimes you have a tendency to skip certain steps or skip certain aspects for the sake of speed and for the sake of time. But I fully agree that I can give the advice to any founder, any technical founder. It made so much sense to build it solid from the startup. Take risk management into account. Take contracting into account, get your quality requirements well defined. All these aspects, they feel sometimes maybe like a drain of time and energy and resources. But I think it's for the better because it builds a really solid basis. And now we have so much more confidence in what we've made and confidence in our structure and that we can make something reproducible and it's also less dependent on me. So, for example, I could, I don't want to be hit by a bus, but I could be hit by a bus and the company could move forward because we got it all well structured in that sense. So that it makes it maybe also from an investor point of view, way more attractive because you de-risk the whole production, operation, etc. Of course, this is not an invitation for all the bus drivers to hit me.
Please not. No.
Please don't do this.
No.
But from a company point of view, I think this is a really good development. I think in that sense, we turn the pain into a promise and into more perspective.
Yeah. Ron, what is the one thing that you wish investors knew about or better understood about launching a diagnostic solution like what you're doing with CC Diagnostics?
I thought about this answer. Because if Nutte and I meet investors and we do pitches, etc., and we have contacted like 200 investors, you typically hear from you need to be post-revenue. You need to have already some revenue, even if it's just €1,000. You need to have some revenue. But what people need to understand that if you're bringing something new and radical to market in diagnostics, you can't sell until you have done the full registration and certification of your product. You're basically not even allowed to sell for specific purposes until you have done that. And what you don't want as a startup in diagnostics is cut corners. That's absolutely the last thing you should do. But investors need to understand that asking very rigidly for some revenue already before they actually find you attractive at all or want to consider you, that the diagnostic market is a completely different market from any other market. It needs to be proven, and then you can sell. Until that time, there is nothing to sell because the product theoretically doesn't exist. It can work in your hands, it can work in the hands of a scientific collaborator, but it's not a sellable product as such. And I wish and I hope that in future, and thanks to the podcast, that investor will see that. There's one more aspect to this, and that is we're not replacing something in the market. We're coming with a totally new solution. So it's a market that needs to be built, and that's what we're doing right now. So there's a lot of consensus in our market that what Nutte called DNA methylation is indeed the holy grail towards early detection of cancer. And in some cancer types, this is already a reality, but in cervical cancer, it is something that will come. It will come inevitably, but that timeline is not 100% defined. And investors with their 5 years in, 5 years defesting, they have difficulty dealing with that. And they shouldn't, because if you just look at the total market that needs a solution like this, there is no end to this. It is just a matter of how big can you scale. But timelines are somewhat uncertain. That is a reality, I think, of the diagnostic market as such, but also of the bringing a totally new solution to market. And rigidness doesn't help in things like this. But I do understand, but I also wish more understanding for our side of the picture.
I think what you say, Ron, I can totally relate, and I think that is also why we do this. It takes a certain kind of investor, especially when you're in health innovation. As you rightly say, I invest myself in medical technology. You have nothing to sell until you have the clinical validation. You have, But yes, and I think there's a certain amount of awareness, there's a certain amount of advocacy, but there's also a certain amount of show me the money, and we can demonstrate that we can be successful and that this is a model that works. And I think as we have more of those storytelling and successes, we can get more people converted. But this is something that requires a collective effort from all of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think on that point, maybe Nutte, Ron, I don't know who would like to take this question, but if we sort of fast forward into the future, what are sort of the milestones from your perspective that would represent success for you?
Well, that's a great question. Success is always, I would say, hard to define. What's personal success, what is success from a company point of view, and what's success for the world. But for me, it would be great to look towards an implemented technology in several labs where we could already start working with them, gather feedback, improve further, certify our test first as a CE certified product so we can serve Europe, and then next step would be an FDA certified product. Then we want to scale globally and bring it, as Ronald already mentioned, to the communities where it's needed the most. And that's also specifically low middle income countries. But as we have scale, we can also make it for a really attractive price point. So my long-term goal would really be that every woman willing to get diagnosed, she would have the possibility to get diagnosed. And therefore, the cool thing of cervical cancer is that it's fully preventable. It's a horrible disease, but it also has this really interesting, from a medical point of view, I'm a medical doctor, you really have the possibility to make a big impact here. Because you can prevent disease. And I think that's really fascinating. If you are early enough, you can basically remove the cells who have a tendency to get cancerous, and then you eradicated cancer totally. And that's amazing. Combined with vaccination, I can really dream of the moment that we beat cervical cancer. And I'm not alone in this. Also, the WHO has really strong vision and ambition in this space. So this is where we aim for, and we know we cannot do this alone. So we'll have to partner up with bigger companies who have global scale of their HPV tests, so we can combine our efforts and serve the labs in the best way possible.
I would like to add one thing there, and it's a true story from last week when Nutte and I and our CSO were at this congress that he mentioned, the Eurogen. What I wish is that we would not, Nutte in this case, be approached by a woman who bought an entry ticket as a delegate for this congress, has nothing to do with his science, but has advanced cervical cancer and was hoping to speak to a gynecologist there, willing to help her.
Yeah, we hope all those cases can be prevented.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think at the beginning, I did talk about dropping an insight. So let me close that loop. I think I will come to you, Ron, with this. What is the one insight or mindset shift that has changed how you lead?
Oh, wow.
Also taking into account big company background and now running a startup, because those are two different animals.
At a given moment, if you move up in your career, you think you have all the wisdom and the decisions you make are just the decisions you make and people just have to follow because you've done all that. You reached all that. And then you come to an organization like this where the average employee is the age of my children. And you see these brilliant minds and you realize that it's absolutely necessary to listen to all of them and come to consensus. If an organization indeed gets bigger, some form of hierarchy needs to be there. It's typically like that. But in the organization I'm really proud that we are all operating at a super equal level and that every piece of information somebody can bring to the table should and is valued equally, yes. Irrespective of who says it. And I've once done an exercise at one of the companies I work with, and it was nameless, rankless. Not sure if you know that, but that where people from the military came in, and you could say anything to anyone at that time. Wow. And still, in such a session, you see that people don't speak their mind. Well, trust, we all speak our mind, and we all listen to each other, and we'll come to a conclusion. And you might not be so happy with that, but that is the consensus. That is the decision we're going to take, and I'm really proud that we achieved that kind of collaboration together.
What a great culture! You know, we always say there's the saying, "Culture will eat strategy for breakfast." What a great culture!
Well, yeah.
All right. At this point, I want to come to the quick fire round. So maybe I start with Ron. Let me come to you.
Yeah.
What's the last thing that made you laugh?
The last thing Nutte saying in the US, and indeed to me, from the day was so busy, we had no time to get tired. And it was true. It was like a 12-hour working day with no time to rest, eat, go to the restroom, nothing.
Yes.
And then in the end, he said, "Oh man, we forgot to get tired." Yeah.
That's a good one. Nutte, one book or podcast that changed your thinking?
I think personally, it's a Dutch podcast though, but it's on investing young. So basically taking the time for compound interest, and I think that's before I listened to that podcast, I had a bit of fear of investing myself, taking up, for example, exploring stock market opportunities. But they explained it so well, and I think there are definitely a lot of these kind of podcasts available also in the language you prefer. But I think that's for me that's something I learned from podcast and also implemented within a week. So that's pretty rare though. But it's I think that's definitely a good one.
That's a great one. And Ron, back to you with the last one. What's one thing that people wouldn't expect about you?
Wouldn't expect about me?
Yes.
Well, that I do believe that I'm extremely handy and make stuff. I just sent Nutte indeed some pictures of what I did over the weekend, making the beginning of an outdoor kitchen. And I do that without any drawings. I just start working, and I built stables for my horses. That is just an animation, but we have horses. I built a carport, a garage, a pool house, all these kind of things, and I just start somewhere. And that's not how you should do it, but I don't see another. I'm very visual, so maybe you wouldn't expect that.
I cannot build anything to save my life.
No.
No. Nutte, what about you? What's the one thing that people wouldn't expect about you?
What they don't expect about me? That's a good one. I think that people expect that I always are super active, but I typically recharge a lot while just being alone, reading a book or listening to some music. So people always ask me, are you such an extrovert person? And I kind of like being around with people, but I do recharge a lot when just being in solitude and reflecting upon things. And I think that's also when I remember a lot of things I still have to do. So I have my list of action list and always next to me. But that's, I think when I tell that to people, they're usually surprised because when I'm in networking, I'm also really excited and enjoy that a lot. That's cool.
That's great. Thank you so much. Nutte, Ron, thank you again, both of you, for this powerful and honest conversation. I think I can say that your work is not only game-changing, but it is deeply needed. And so I think we've come to the end of the episode. To our listeners, if this episode sparked your curiosity or it made you think differently about women's health, then please take a moment to leave us a review. It helps more people find these important conversations. And you can connect with me, with Nutte, with Ron on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're an investor who's listening to this podcast, or you're curious about joining CC Diagnostics on this journey, they are raising at the moment. So please reach out either to myself or to Nutte and Ron directly. I will leave their details. I will put that in the show notes so you can reach out to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe to Fem Health Ventures and share this episode with someone who cares about innovation in women's health. Ron, Nutte, thank you again.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And until next time, stay curious.
Okay, we will.
And that's a wrap. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, then please hit that subscribe button, leave us a comment, and share it with a friend who'd love to join the conversation. Don't forget to follow us for more insight into the future of women's health. And until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep championing the health of women everywhere.